So, Star Trek finally has a body swap episode that's actually good. Bingo! Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 1 Episode 5, Spock Amok. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. So I have to start with a spoiler warning for Strange New Worlds up to Season 1 Episode 5. If you have not seen this video, although you will not want to watch this video if you have not seen the episode, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So I know I did mention that this was a body swap episode before I gave the spoiler warning, which I know I particularly noted that other videos were purposely trying not to do that, but I got two things to say about that. First of all, that's a very vague spoiler. Now granted, they didn't give this away in any of the trailers, so it is kind of a spoiler, but it doesn't tell you any specifics about the episode, just what the general theme is, basically. And second thing is, if you don't want to know a spoiler that vague, then perhaps might I recommend not watching a video review of an episode you haven't seen yet. Why don't you just go watch the freaking episode first? But anyways, I make no apologies for that, by the way, is what I'm saying, because I like my fucking cool intro. Anyway, so, yes, Strange New Worlds has done a comedy episode, a lighthearted comedy episode, which, to be fair, have not been my favorites throughout any iteration of Star Trek. But just like everything else, Strange New Worlds, when it does something, it does the best possible version of it. It does a really fucking good job at it. Because yes, there are a lot. If you look at the worst lists I have for Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, they are littered with comedy episodes, or episodes that are quote unquote fun, that are actually just terrible and agonizing. But there are a few episodes, such as Move Along Home, which I do think are in fact fun, and this is one of them. I think this was a very fun episode, unlike Bada Bing Bada Bang, because that's just an agony piece of crap and not at all fun. But anyway, I had to mention that. But this episode was in fact a lot of fun. Now, I think it's also what it was needed after the very serious, very suspenseful, very tension-filled, on edge of your seat episode we had last week. And again, it just shows to me how brilliant the show is, and how this is turning out to be one of the best Star Trek shows, period. Not just like new Trek. It is definitely the best of the newer Trek shows, but I don't know, we're only 5 episodes in, so I can't make any grand proclamations, but I can't think of any other Star Trek show that started out with its first 5 episodes all being great to some degree or another. I can't think of one. But anyway, it's a different format, because back in the 90s, I was in a famous TV show. I mean, back in the 90s, it was, they had to, I talked about this before, they had to do 26, 25 episodes, and so they didn't really have time to make each episode great, which is, since the season only has 10 episodes, they do have the time and resources to devote to each episode and make it great. And that's what I think they're doing. So, it will be, even once this show is finished, or the season finished, and once the show gets going, it's still going to be hard. It's still going to be apples and oranges to compare this to older Trek shows, because it was just a totally different format. But, you can say which one you like or don't like, and this is definitely turning out to being one of the best season ones in the Trek franchise, and if it continues this way for the next 5 episodes, I will say it will beat out my previous favorite season 1, Voyager, which I do love. Voyager season 1, that is my second favorite season of that show. I just rewatched that recently. Anyway, so this episode, it was fun. Like, it was a lot of lightheartedness. Now, the body swap episode as I said, this has been a trope that Trek has not done well. I can only think of two examples where they attempted to do this. One being the worst episode of the original series and one of the worst episodes of the entire franchise, in my opinion, Turnabout Intruder, which was horrible for... Yeah, it was sexist and other reasons, and William Shatner's acting was absolutely terrible. So I don't want to think about that giant piece of crap. And then there was like Body and Soul from Voyager, where the Doctor takes over Seven of Nine's body, which wasn't a terrible episode, but kind of a stupid, forgettable one. It wasn't really that fun. And I think there might be some that I'm forgetting about. I'm sure people will remind me in the comments, Mark, you forgot about that episode. But I don't remember any of them being that good. So, and this one was actually good. Now, when they first did the trope, I'm like, well, that's a bit ridiculous. That's probably wouldn't happen, where the Katras would get stuck in the other body. But you know what? I told that voice in my head, shut the fuck up, this is going to be funny. And it was. And it worked. It was a fun concept, even though the premise was a bit ridiculous. And I actually, more than that, here's my major point with this episode, is unlike crap like Bada Bing, Bada Bang, which is just regurgitating tropes and cliches, this episode has a very strong character story, and it's executed very well. Now I have to talk a bit about the opening scene, which I fucking loved, with Spock's dream, where they brought back the music out, and they did the whole like shaking the beads and shit. They did, and Amok Time. Now I recently did my review for season 2 of TOS. And I talked about Amok Time and how I think that's a bit cheesy, that it doesn't really make sense. The Vulcans they seem very illogical, and it seems a bit out of character for them to have these nonsensical rituals involving shaking a bunch of bells. But, it's consistent with what's already been established. So I still had that thought again when watching this episode, but I thought, well, this is, it's got to stay true to the original series, and it was a nice callback, and of course having the music in was a beautiful callback as well. And it's like, it did feel like an updated version of that music. I was just so happy. And it was a contribute to the great character story. It was a great metaphor about, and it sort of set the stage for the whole episode about Spock's doubts about being part human, and how his inner conflict between being Vulcan and human was, and he was literally the Vulcan and human sides were warring with themselves in this dream, and it really set his mindset, and it did, so that played a huge part going forward with his relationship with T'Pring, because there was these undercurrents of Spock feeling that he wasn't good enough for her because of his human side, and him thinking that she doesn't think he's good enough for her because of his human side, because the first thing she does when she sees him is criticize his decoration as being too human. But we find out through the course of the episode that T'Pring actually doesn't really care about that at all. It's just Spock's own insecurities, and T'Pring actually has other issues that are actually very legitimate, such as Spock not taking her career seriously, but expecting not making the time for her because of his career, but then he expects her to drop everything for her career to come running to her, and not taking the relationship seriously. And I love that dynamic, and I think having them switch bodies and play the part of the other person was absolutely an amazing story device to get the other to literally put themselves in the other person's shoes and feel like and see things from their perspective. And by the way, I thought the actors did an amazing job of portraying the other person. and the humor involved was just spectacular. Like when Pike comes in and they tried to play it off, and eventually they're like, no, we gotta tell him, which I love, because most like sitcoms or whatever that do this kind of trope would just keep it up so they could do the hijinks. And I love that they immediately told Pike, and that I think it was T'Pring and Spock's buddy said, oh, you could probably tell because of our mannerisms, and Pike's like, oh yeah, totally. Like, because they're both very, serious, straight-faced Vulcans that they don't distinguish. But you actually could tell if you paid close attention that their mannerisms were a bit different. But I did love Pike's reaction. I also love the whole, speaking of the hijinks, the whole way that T'Pring is like, I do not approve of hijinks, and this is getting very close to hijinks, and I really hate hijinks. And it does get kind of into hijinks because they have to, T'Pring has to parade us around as Spock during these negotiations, and Spock has to parade around as T'Pring. But it works. Like, it never gets too tropey. It never gets too ridiculous. Where like they never use like stupid sitcom humor or anything like that. The humor is works because it's not over the top. It's subtle, but it also drives the character story, which comes across very well, where Spock goes on the character journey to become more comfortable with his human half and to be more aware of what T'Pring actually wants. Now, Canon Hulk hat on. This does completely not match with the original series because it was heavily implied in the episode of Mock Time, which I just watched not that long ago, that T'Pring and Spock didn't really have a prior relationship, that they were just betrothed as kids and hadn't really seen each other since then, which is the way it works in some cultures. Also, I already talked about the whole Pungfar only being 7 years, but I talked about that in the previous episode. And then there's and Kirk and Spock, when they went to Vulcan in the episode of Mock Time, had no idea T'Pring even existed. When she showed up on screen, and Kirk's like, Spock, who is that? And then Spock goes, she's my fiance. They're like, oh my god, and they play even the suspenseful music, like, da da da, oh my god, Spock has a fiance. So they had no idea, whereas here everyone fucking knows. Like, she just hangs out with Spock and the entire crew, Pike and everyone. Like, what happened to Uhura? Did she suddenly forget that Spock had a fiance named T'Pring? But yeah, so this whole thing of her, but again, like, here's the thing, like, it does still bother me. I'm not going to be totally forgiven on it because this definitely does not match up with the original series, but on the other hand, I'm not going to come down on it like a ton of bricks like I was, say, trying to retcon the Borg into being around 20 years before Q introduced them, which makes no fucking sense. Fuck you, Voyager. Dark Frontier episode sucks. But I'm not going to come down as hard on this episode as that, because it's better storytelling. Like, it's actually really, especially the way they're using it here by exploring Spock's character, even though they are retconning things pretty heavily. Good character stories, so I'll forgive them like halfway. I'll forgive them enough to enjoy the good character stories that they're making. But it still kind of bothers me a little bit, though. Anyway, also, of course, now that I have my Canon Hulk hat on, let's talk about Nurse Chapel. I gotta reiterate that this character should have a different name. That's all they needed to do to fix this problem. I would have no problems with this character whatsoever if they say, oh, this is Nurse Church. This is Nurse Synagogue. I don't know. just come up with a different name for her and say this is a totally different character and all your problems are solved. This character in no way, shape, or form is Nurse Chapel, and it is impossible for my brain to try to comprehend that this is the same character that Majel Barrett played, because it's not. She acts different, her demeanor is different, and quite frankly, she's a much better character than Nurse Chapel was. Nurse Chapel was a flat, two-dimensional character who was just lusting after Spock because he's so hot or whatever. And this character's so much better than that. And so for them to say that this is the earlier version of that flat 60s stereotype of a woman type character is kind of an insult, and it demeans the episode and the whole thing that Chapel was giving Spock this great advice, and then all of a sudden we're meant to believe 10 or 8 years or however long from now that all of a sudden Nurse Chapel is just going to go back, just going to be a flat two-dimensional character lusting after Spock. It does not compute. So yeah, that is something that's going to irk me a lot more than any inconsistencies with T'Pring, and it's going to continue to irk me. This character simply should have been created as a new character. Just flat out, full stop. Like Uhura, that's fine having Uhura, having M'Baga, having number one because we barely knew her in the first place, and having Spock. Like, that's all. I have no issues with any of that. You can have legacy characters, but in this case, it just doesn't work. It just does not work. But anywho, let's take my Canyon Hawk hat off. Anyway, so back to the episode. I like the through storyline with the negotiations. It was a nice little B plot that actually. Usually, I hate when. I hate a lot of TNG and Voyager episodes in particular. They're the ones that are the most guilty of this, of having a and B plot, and the A plot's this character story, and the B plot is a nonsensical science anomaly BS of the week that nobody gives a flying rat's ass about, and usually does not tie into the A plot whatsoever. And and they've done that. Next Generation and Voyager did that so many times, and I really hate that. This is not. And to be fair to New Trek, they actually do a good job of avoiding that, and usually if there is a B or plot, particularly lower decks, they make them work in tangent, and this is an example of that, where this kind of, because it becomes a factor in the A plot with the Spock and T'Pring thing, because T'Pring and Spock's body has to become part of this negotiation, and the plot stands alone has a really sort of interesting side plot, where there's a species that the Federation desperately wants to make an alliance with, and Pike slowly figures out that what they're doing, because they show them at first arguing with Tellarites, and then when they come to see Pike, they seem to be the friendliest people, and they're getting along all really well with Pike, and all of a sudden they're like, nah, we don't want to talk to you anymore, we're going to drop negotiations. They're like, what the fuck? But they realized that they were just kind of emulating Pike and just going, because his was like a friendly demeanor of like having dinner and whatnot, and so they were just going along with it. And then so when they wanted to see Spock is because they wanted to get the Vulcan perspective, and all of a sudden they were acting like Vulcans, and that's when Pike kind of picked up on this, and he realized it wasn't just simply they were emulating or that they were copying other races and they had no identity of their own. It was more of they were trying to empathize and show empathy and feel what it was like to be their opponents. So when Pike did the same to them, and I still love that whole ending where Pike was just like, well, you shouldn't join the Federation because we're going to do this, and it's going to be all these issues, and he like brings everything up, and then they're like, oh, thank you so much, and then they go out and they fly the UFP flag. Actually, I really like that. I really liked Robert April's reaction. I love that they're making Robert April the kind of Admiral Forrest of of this show, that the having the Admiral who's always there. I guess Admiral Ross would be an example of DS9, but that was only the last 2 seasons. But really, and the Admiral Forrest of the show, I do like that, and I think that works. So, I like all the little character interactions. I think there's a lot of humor, such as the whole thing with, I particularly like the other plot with Number One and La'an. That was a lot of fun, the whole Enterprise bingo thing. And it was a very simple comedy C plot, but it works. It's because they find out that people has this perception of them of being stick in the mugs where fun goes to die, and so they just end up like doing these ridiculous fun thing. And it also this does remind me a lot of like Lower Decks, like the way that they play the Lower Deckers, and I do like that. And I think that's almost like intentional because it's showcasing the Lower Deckers more than most other Star Trek shows would. And that they have this, like, it does seem very Lower Deck-esque, this whole Enterprise bingo thing. And I like it. I love how they go and they do it, and they mess around with the Enterprise bingo, and they transported someone just so the gum could get its flavor back. Like little mundane stuff like that, using this kind of futuristic technology that I think is actually, yeah. So I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed that for the characters, and I enjoyed that they had this moment of like fun bonding. It was like a really bonding episode between these two characters who became at odds with each other, like almost just 2 episodes ago. So I love they had this fun release. And then the whole thing with Ortegas and her interactions with Chapel and Mbaga and his like fishing hat, and people making fun of him for that. Like all this stuff worked. So overall, I thought this was a really fun episode. Really great character stories. Even the insignificant C plot that was kind of silly, it even brought out their characters. So that's, to me, what distinguishes a actual fun episode from the piece of crap that people are like, oh, but it's fun, but it's actually crap, is the character stories. If you have great character stories and you involve the characters and they make sense for the characters, but you have fun and make some jokes along the way, that is what makes a good fun episode. So my rating for Spock Amok out of 10 is going to be an 8. Extremely good. Now, I was thinking about giving this episode a 7. I was sort of torn between a 7 and 8. In fact, I would probably, if I did 0.5, I would give this episode a 7.5. But I don't do 0.5. I don't do that. So it's either going to be a 7 or an 8. So I think this deserves, it's closer to an 8 to me than it is a 7. But it's a low 8. But still, so it's probably my least favorite episode of the first 5 that aired so far. But I still like it. I still think it's a good episode. I still think it's a fun episode. It's just like the funny stuff and the fun stuff were never my favorite, which is why Trouble with Tribbles and stuff like that is like way overrated. I would never call a fun episode one of my favorites of the show. I watched Star Trek for the intense sci-fi drama action. Well, mostly drama and sci-fi rather than comedy. But if there's a decent comedy episode that's good like this one, then I shall appreciate it. So, that is it for my review of episode 5 of Strange New Worlds. I shall return next week to review episode 6 and then every week after to keep covering the show. So be sure to check me out for that. Check out my channel also, as I cover many more older Star Trek videos. The videos aren't old, but the episodes I review are older. Anyway, other Star Trek stuff and other shows like Star Wars Rebels, Better Call Saul, The Expanse, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.